Okay, well, good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to an important discussion on an issue that is on all of our minds, which is the situation in Israel and the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We're joined today by three important thinkers on the topic, all of whom are linked by their association with the Harry S. Truman Research Institute for the Advancement of Peace at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The Truman Institute was founded in 1965 with the direct involvement and support of President Truman. And it is the first and most important and largest research institute, not just in Israel, but throughout the Middle East, that studies and works on and has a very active role in thinking about and pursuing peace in the region. Our three speakers today come at the topic from a variety of perspectives. Professor Moshe Maoz is a former director of the Truman Institute and is the Professor Emeritus of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University. Dr. Dilka Cohen is a research fellow in the Middle East unit at the Truman Institute. And Dr. Ronni Shaked is the Middle East and Islam Research Unit Coordinator at Truman. He is also the senior correspondent and commentator on Palestinian affairs for the Hebrew daily newspaper Yediot Aharonot. Let me turn it over to our speakers today. Professor Maoz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, for your remarks. Good day to everybody. I would start, if I may, by indicating that the last or the recent round of hostilities between Israel and Hamas is a number four, since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007, the fourth, and all of them produce havoc, death, wounded, destruction, but no solution. So in my opinion, and there may be other opinions, and I know there are other opinions in Israel, there is no military solution to our conflict with Hamas or with the Palestinians, only a political one. And it is related to many issues, but I would like to stress the issue of the Temple Mount, or Harem al-Sharif in Arabic, Al-Aqsa Mosque. This has been, I think, the main vehicle for Hamas to steer this conflict, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank, among Israeli Arabs, in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, even with friends of Israel, or those who sign alliances with Israel, or treaties with Israel, Jordan, Egypt, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all of them criticize because it is very important to the Muslim world and to the Jewish world. So in my opinion, the issue of the Temple Mount is the key for peace or war between Jews and Muslims. If I may make a commercial, this is the thesis of my recent book, Jews, Muslims, and Jerusalem, Disputes and Dialogues. We have to stress the dialogue. I'll come to it later. But unfortunately, there very little dialogue. For centuries under Islam, I'm an historian, so I'll very briefly indicate some of the highlights. For centuries under Islam, and Islam was ruling with just one interruption of the Crusaders, the region in Palestine, Jerusalem, since the 7th century. And by and large, Muslims allowed Jews to pray in the Western Wall, but not in the Temple Mount, the Harem al-Sharif. For years, and this was a sort of the status quo, which was also maintained by the Israeli rabbinate. They say, we cannot rebuild the temple until the Messiah comes. The Messiah will settle everything. Now, already in the 20s and the 30s of the 20th century, both sides became more radicalized. More of the Arabs than the Jews. If you remember Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the pro-Nazi Mufti of Jerusalem, he utilized the Haram Sharif, Al-Aqsa, to incite against Jews, not only among the Palestinians, also among Arabs and Muslims all over the world. And he stages hostilities against the Jews. But as you know, it takes two to tango. Jews also, not very many. And incidentally, those who were radicalized and wanted to destroy the mosque and rebuild the Temple Mount were initially secular, not religious, right-wing secular. The movement Beitar, Etzel, I belonged to them at the time, so I know. And Lehi, the Stern Gang. And they had all kinds of plans and some attempts. It didn't work. The main change, the main transformation was in 1967, when Israel occupied it or liberated, depends on your point of view, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and so on, and the Haram al-Sharif. This gave rise to major radicalization on both sides, also promoting, unfortunately, Islamophobia on the Jewish side and Judeophobia on the Muslim side. And it's go further and further and further. On the Muslim side, just to give you some examples, in 1968, there was a big conference in Al-Azhar in Egypt, an Ajab center of hundreds of scholars, imams, muftis, claiming or announcing a jihad, holy war against Israel, and shahada, sacrificing their lives for the and then in a year later, a special international Islamic organization was organized, settled, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, and so on and so forth, and it continued further, and there were a number of eruptions. In 1966, there was a tunnel built by Israel. Netanyahu was in charge at the time, and it flared, and again, hundreds of people were killed on both sides. And you remember the first Intifada, 2000. This unfortunately occurred after Mr. Sharon, who was in the opposition at the time, went on Temple Mount with 1,000 soldiers. And this was for Muslims a major provocation. And the Intifada lasted for a long time, killing many people and destroying houses and lives. And then there was another stage of Intifada in 1915, which was called the knife or the bladed Intifada. Again, over Aqsa. In my book, I enumerated that the main clashes between Muslims and Jews and Muslims were on this side. Also on the Jewish side, at the beginning, there were only a handful of Jews, Messianic Jews, I would say, that wanted to liberate the Temple Mount and rebuild the temple, the third temple, on the ruins of the mosque. One of them was my former student, Gershon Salomon, the head of the faithful of the mounts, the Temple Mount. I didn't educate him well, I expect. And then it was followed. We have now 20 organizations that prepare the artifacts and the altar and the red heifer to rebuild the temple on the ruins of them. And this is really very, very, very unfortunate. There was also in 1984 an attempt by another Israeli, Yuda, whatever his name. Anyway, bomb the Dome of the Rock, which is not a mosque, but it's a very, very important building, and so on and so forth. Now, there has been, as I said earlier, dialogues between rabbis and muftis and scholars. The Truman Institute held hundreds of dialogues and prepared papers that we sent to the government, and it didn't help. Just to mention two things which were more political. One was the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 that gave some solution to the conflict of a two-state solution, and Jerusalem is going to be the capital of Palestine and of Israel. West Israel is Jerusalem. Israel didn't accept. And then Olmert, Prime Minister of Israel in 2008, and then another, in my opinion, wonderful blueprint of two-state solution, two capitals in Jerusalem, and the holy places under international supervision with Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, and the United States. But the Arabs didn't accept it. So unfortunately, my conclusion is that we in the Middle East cannot deal with this issue. We need help. And the help must come from Mr. Biden. Trump was not very helpful. He sided more with the extreme Israeli right. Only, in my opinion, only Mr. Biden and Blinken can do it, and they are working in this. Unfortunately, this is the situation, because this also serves the interest of the world, the interest of the United States, and the interest of Israel. And Israel's interest is to have a settlement, to have a Palestinian state, demilitarized, and they accept it, next to Israel, living in coexistence, and this could also affect the entire Middle East. I hope it's not a dream. With this happy note, thanks very much. I finished my initial presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Maoz. Dr. Cohen?
Yes, please. I would like to share my screen. It will take me a minute or two. Please be patient. I hope you get the full screen. Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm honored to be with you today, and I'm especially happy to be with my two favorite mentors, Dr. Ronni Shaked and Professor Moshe Maoz, who are both colleagues from the Truman Institute. I would like to focus today on a very interesting faction from the Palestinian arena. It's called the PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I have made a big research about this faction, and I would like to share some of the conclusions with you, please. First of all, I would like us all to see the logo of the Islamic Jihad in Palestine, PIJ. With your permission, I will try to read the verse from the chapter 29, chapter of the spider, Surat al-Ankabut, and the very ending verse of this chapter, which says in Arabic, وَالَّذِينَ جَهَدُوا فِينَا لَنُهُدِنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. I will try to translate. Those of us who make the jihad will be laid to the right ways, for God is with the good deed doers. That's the correct translation. Under the top, we have two words, Allah Akbar, meaning Allah is the greatest. Some of the terrorists used to shout these words when just before the terror attack. Underneath, we have two AK-47 rifles. In Israel, we call them Kalashnikovs after the Russian inventor. And over here, as we've heard just now, the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then the full Palestine, full map of Palestine, 2 fists symbolizing power and violence, and the name of the movement established during the late 70s, first 80s of the 20th century. Harakat el-Jihad el-Islami fi Palestine, meaning the movement of Palestinian jihad in Palestine. So there's a saying in Hebrew, Tovat muna me'elef milim, meaning a picture is better than 1,000 words. So I believe we are getting the main themes over here. Our next slide will try to connect the PIJ to the recent events in Gaza and in Israel. As we see, the PIJ is the second strongest military force in the Gaza Strip after Hamas. A small comparison between Hamas and PIJ will show us that Hamas has 30,000 militants, while the PIJ has 15,000 militants. But the amazing fact is that only last year in 2020, the PIJ had 10,000 militants. So there's an increase of 5,000 militants in just 1 year. To add to all this, we should see that Iran is PIJ's only weapons provider, meaning both of them share the same radical doctrine, seeks to destroy Israel. And this last round, the Guardian of the Walls, we called it this operation, we saw more than 4,000 rockets fired at Israel, both from Hamas and PJ. But the small details tell us that the arsenal of Hamas before the operation was 5,000 to 6,000 rockets, while the PIJ had 8,000 rockets. We are talking about short range meaning 40 to 55 kilometers as far as Ashkelon. So it can reach Sderot, it can reach Netivot, but at the maximum range, it can reach also Ashkelon. And the rockets are named Al-Qassam, or the hell of Ashkelon, Jahim Askalan in Arabic. These are the main rockets. Another important fact to notice over here is that the rockets of Hamas, many of them are homemade, meaning manufactured in the Gaza strips in popular workshops. But the PIJ's rockets, most of them are imported from Iran directly and smuggled into the Gaza Strip through the famous tunnels, most of them now under big destruction. So that's a comparison which is relevant to the late recent war between Israel and Gaza. As for preliminary events, I would like to mention few specific dates that are relevant to the Guardian of all the Walls operation. First of all, the last month was the holy month of Ramadan, a month of fasting for all Muslim believers from dawn to sunset. And the actual dates in Palestine were from April 13th to May 11th. We remember that the beginning of the operation was May the 10th, just one day before the ending of Ramadan. So during the Ramadan, we see tendency to escalation. We see Iran, Quds Day, on May the 7th, meaning a day dedicated for Jerusalem and established during the 80s by Ayatollah Khomeini, former leader of Iran, meaning you have to celebrate the last Friday of Ramadan by dedicating your work for Allah concerning Jerusalem. It's called in Arabic Jum'a al-Yatima. and it was celebrated on May 7th. On May 8th, just the day afterwards, there was an event, a very important event at Temple Mount called Laylat el-Qadr, the fatal night. It's a little bit like Yom Kippur in Judaism. It's meaning that Allah, God, is sentencing his believers to life or death during this very night. So we have a peak of escalation during May the 7th and during May the 8th. And during this escalation, what we see on the ground is riot and disorder. We see two main public centers in Jerusalem, two locations, the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, which is very close to the campus of our campus of Mount Scopus, and the other location is the Nablus or the Damascus Gate, which we see over here. What youngsters and adolescents usually do during Ramadan is sitting on the stairs and having a little time of fun after the iftar, after the fasting is ended. So what they usually do, they sit over here on the stairs in the Nablus Gate. And this year, it was very difficult for them because the police wouldn't let it happen naturally at the beginning. So we have seen during May 7th and May 8th, escalation going wilder and wilder. And in the Israeli Jerusalem Day, at May the 10th, we saw the actual beginning of the operation by launching 6 rockets at Jerusalem. Now, a little bit about the historical and ideological background. The historical and ideological background of the PIJ has to do with one person in particular. This person is called Fathi Ibrahim Abdelaziz Ishkaki, nicknamed Abu Ibrahim. Fathi Ishkaki, born 1951, was the founder and leader of PIJ. He was an amazing combination of what we call a mega terrorist, initiating many terror attacks, and, you wouldn't believe it, a children's physician. He studied medicine when he was young in Egypt and then came back to the Gaza Strip to act as a physician. But when the first Intifada came to life at 1987, he said he saw a reflection of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in it. Just after a year, in 1988, al-Shkaki was exiled to Lebanon by Israel. But in Beirut, he made friends with very similar friends to the Iranians. He made friends with the Shia Mujahideen from Hezbollah. He made friends with the Shia Mujahideen, the warriors, and he adapted Khomeini's preaching about the elimination of Israel as a necessity and the concern for the holy places in Jerusalem. We will go back to 1987 and we'll see what was so special about the first Intifada, the first mass uprising of the Palestinians. Well, it was the first success in acting independently from the neighboring Arab states. For Israel, obviously, the situation was quite tragic. We had 300 casualties among civilians and security forces. And 1987 was also the year of the religious awakening and the foundation, the real foundation of both Islamic movements, Hamas, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the movement of Islamic resistance, and Jihad, PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Israeli control over East Jerusalem has become at this stage a symbol for Palestinians' national movement struggle. And as for the second Intifada, as my dear colleague, Professor Maoz mentioned, the famous visit of Ariel Sharon in Temple Mount was the direct cause, as Palestinians saw it, to the Second Intifada, which was much more bloodier. And the Palestinians accused Sharon of lighting the fire once again because of this specific visit in Temple Mount. During the 2000 Intifada, the Second Intifada, their favorite tactics was, as we all remember, sadly, suicide bombing. They targeted Israeli civilians and focused on crowded places, such as restaurants, markets, buses, so on. In the Palestinian terminology, they called it the Al-Aqsa Intifada, after the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of course. And another thing we saw is that Jerusalem became the center of the conflict because of this Second Intifada. As for the Iranian patronage, well, we see several important facts. PIJ was declared by the US government a foreign terrorist organization early as 1997. It was following brutal terrorist attacks against Israel with Iranian support, in which American citizens were also killed. Later on, in 2005, the US included PIJ's Al-Ihsan Association on the sanction list, but the organization still maintains financial ties with Iran through other associations. And there are also independent money changers in the Gaza strips who help to transfer Iranian funds to PIJ. In the picture, we can see a meeting between the current leader of the Islamic Jihad in Palestine, called Ziad Nakhaleh, and the leader of Iran, Khamenei, and the meeting took place in 2018. So actual aspects of practical patronage from Iran to the PIJ is through weapons supply, through funds, financial associations, and through public support. And I believe that one of Israel's most important targets should be breaking the linkage between Iran and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That will be all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. I think you've given us a lot of insight about something that many perhaps knew very little. Dr. Shaked, can I turn it over to you, please?
Okay. Hello, everybody. On Friday morning, we finished another round of fighting between Hamas and Israel. As it was said here, the fourth round of fighting during the last 12 years. In 11 days, Hamas and Islamic Jihad launched 4,500 rockets on Israel. It was a real blitz. The Iron Dome missiles, which managed, thanks God, to intercept 90% of them, managed not to make a lot of damage. In previous round of fighting with Hamas, Hamas went to the war in order to improve conditions in Gaza Strip, to gain political and economic achievement. This time, it was not Gaza. The focus was Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa. Let me say, the ethnic national conflict over the territory has become a religious conflict. Religious conflict is irrational, much more dangerous. And it was, the 11 days, it was a religious war for the sake of Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem. The clear message of Hamas was that Hamas is capable of defending Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa and can motivate and mobilize all Palestinian people to fight against Israel. The goal set by Hamas this time concerned not only Israel, but mostly strengthen itself in inside the Palestinian society and gain legitimacy in the Muslim world. Yes, indeed, Hamas succeeded to achieve the goals right after they launched 6 rockets toward Jerusalem. It was a clear war declaration. Above all, Hamas has demonstrated with the 6 rockets to the Palestinian people that they are, Hamas, the leading Palestinian power, while presenting weakness of Palestinian Authority and Abu Mazen. For this part, Hamas achieved a moral victory. This moral victory and encouraged all Palestinians, revealed their collective religious emotions toward Al-Aqsa, and resuscitate the ethos of conflict and in its core, hatred of Israel and willingness to fight against Israel. From psychological, social point of view, and that's my research topic, I would say that the orientation of collective emotions motivated and mobilized all Palestinian society everywhere. Hatred mixed with religious feeling leads to anti-Semitism, and that's what happened in New York, in Los Angeles, in Europe, and other places. The expression of the burst of collective emotions was not only in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, or among Israeli Arabs. And as I said, even in New York or in Los Angeles, in the Netherlands, in France, Al-Aqsa was and still the glue that all the Palestinian society, religious and secular, and led it to believe, and this is what crystallized the society. Hamas, for its part, has achieved its goal. It placed itself at the forefront of the Palestinian stage and strengthened his legitimacy and achieved hegemony over all Palestinian society. It was a humiliation of Palestinian authority and Abu Mazen. The terrible destruction in Gaza was not as important to Hamas as the political and the moral victory. With your permission, and I know that Professor Maoz and also Dilka talk about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, I just want to add 2 sentences. Religious is not just a theology. Religious mostly is a holy places. Al-Aqsa Mosque / Temple Mount is the core of the conflict. The violation of the sanctity of the holy place for both religions is a violation of the rules of ethics of society. So the struggle in the power of the struggle in the power of kill and not to pass. Thus, the mosque in Jerusalem became a symbol of the religious national patriotism of the Palestinians in their struggle against Zionism in Israel, a factor that unites all Palestinians, religious and secular, including Palestinians who are citizens of the state of Israel. The conflict over the holy place is a zero-sum game. Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas political bureau, outlined Hamas goals few hours before the ceasefire. And I quote, Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinian land, the right of return, and the establishment of Palestinian state over the Palestine land and its capital, Jerusalem. What's happened? Where does this chutzpah came from? Israel, we have to understand what's happened during the last 10 years in order to understand what's happened in this round. Because Israel veterans against Hamas has been severely damaged in the last 10 years. It was not an intelligence error, not because of the IDF and its capabilities, not because of the IDF, but because of the political echelon and its wrong strategy and conception toward Hamas. Netanyahu has adopted a policy of differentiation between the West Bank and Gaza, in order to prevent Palestinian unity. In his view, Palestinian unity would force Israel to return to negotiation table and discuss for a political solution with the Palestinians. The distinction included a conciliatory policy toward Hamas in order to allow Hamas not to allow Hamas, that he is the Abu Mazen enemy, to continue to control Gaza. And at the same time, Netanyahu boycott and use a harsh hand toward Abu Mazen. This strategy enabled Netanyahu government to strengthen settlement and the Israeli hold on the West Bank, and even to plan, with the assistance of his friend and ally, President Donald Trump, to annex part of the West Bank to Israel. In this policy, Netanyahu helped to transfer to Gaza, in fact, to Hamas, a $30 million monthly grant from Qatar. The money was transferred in a suitcases full of cash. Hamas took over half of these dollars, maybe even more, and used to intensify the strengthen its terrorist wing. Hamas has managed to produce thousands of long and medium range rockets, built naval power, and acquired anti-tanks and even anti-aircraft missiles. Dozens of miles of tunnels were built under Gaza, following the Viet Cong model in Vietnam. And under this strategy, Hamas produced thousands of rockets. This forgiving strategy has allowed Hamas to become a political entity with a military arm, not anymore a terrorist organization, but a real army, not even a semi-military militia. Under the auspice of his strategy, this strategy, Hamas has succeeded in mobilizing the younger generation for religious war, jihad. Since 2010, every year, about 50,000 teenagers have passed through Hamas summer camps. In these camps, military training is conducted along with intensive indoctrination, brainwashing with religious ideology and slogans such as the right of return and liberation of Jerusalem. Hamas planted in the mind of those children the illusion that Israel could be ripped up of the map, and that the descendants of the 1948 refugees, they would return to their houses of their ancestors and establish a Palestinian state on the Israeli ruins. That's the situation. The question is, where are we going from this point? I hope that the Israel government will build a new strategy toward Hamas. This round of fighting was a wake-up call. First of all, we have to restore our deterrence against Hamas. I believe that the IDF knows how to do it. The new strategy that I'm thinking about must designate Hamas as an enemy and set it as a goal, and set as a goal its exclusion from Gaza. This is not an impossible task. I believe that with determined wisdom, with cooperation of the Arab states and America, developing the economy in Gaza and positive strategy toward the peace and security, this goal can be achieved. Yes, today there are more Arab states that have peace relations with us than enemies Arab states. I believe even that President Biden is a real friend of Israel, and we have to work together. Egyptian President Sisi did it. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is outlawed. The elected president, Mohammad Morsi, is in jail now. Why we can't do it? Also here, from my point of view, the new strategy must be based on a Zionist vision to build Jewish democratic state. Continuation of the existing policy without separating from the Palestinians will lead to a binational state that no one wants, and it will lead to more violence, wars, and hatred. We must build new policy toward the Israeli Arabs to restore the broken relation after this round of fighting. I believe, and this is also clear from the studies we conducted at the Truman Institute, that the majority of Arabs in Israel see their future within the state of Israel together with the Jewish people. If we are not going to change our strategy toward Hamas and in general toward the conflict with the Palestinians, then we will return to the same point where the round fighting began. The fighting is over, but the war with Hamas continues. The new ceasefire, if the strategy is not going to be changed, will be no more than time out. The countdown to the next round of fighting will start if we are not going to change quickly our strategy and to start to do something in order to change our life here. It is only a matter of time for the next round if we are not, and as I said, if we are not going to change our policy, if we are not going to change our way of looking at the Hamas and at the conflict at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaked. So we have a lot of questions, not surprisingly, given how interesting and how diverse your viewpoints have been. So if I could try and synthesize a number of questions that have to do with the intersection of religion and politics. You know, Dr. Shaked, you presented this as fundamentally a religious conflict, but then at the end talked about political issues. Dr. Maoz, you focused on the political elements of it and the need for the US and in particular President Biden to really engage. And then there are many questions that touch on the issues that Dr. Cohen raised about the involvement of Iran and the challenges that President Biden might confront as he attempts to re-engage with Iran and reinstate a nuclear arms deal involving the United States. So there's an awful lot there, but help us, if you would, think about what are the political solutions to a religious conflict, and how do we collectively, not just those of us in the States, but collectively around the world, how do we deal with the issue of Iran and Iran's important support both for Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad? So maybe I'll ask Professor Maoz, because you started saying this needs to be political. Help us think about political solutions in the realm of religious conflict, and then I would ask.
To start with, it's not only a religious one; it's a mixed religious national one, both for Palestinians and Israelis. I'm an Israeli, but a Jew. I'm not religious. I care for that. The Western world as a symbol, as a national, cultural, historical symbol, and many others too. So it's not a religion. The religious element, of course, radicalize people on both sides. So I think we can try, as I suggested. Maybe I'm wrong. We had so many rounds. There is no military solution. Leave the Palestinians. Take Egypt. We had 4 bloody wars with Egypt. I participated in all of them. what is the end of it? Peace. And it works. And it's not fully worked because the Palestinian issue is not settled. So the Palestinian issue is very, very crucial to be settled for our relations with Arabs, Muslims, and the international community. Look what happens in the world, anti-Semitism and whatever, it's related to, no doubt about it. And Israel is strong enough to take risks. And there are risks involved in the Palestinian state. As Churchill said, in victory, magnanimity. We are not very magnanimous in this respect. We have to be more forthcoming because we are strong. Israel is stronger than all Arab states together. I assure you, I'm a colonel in the army, I know what I'm talking. But there is no military solution. Israel can take a risk, and the Palestinians, not Hamas, Abu Mazen, West Bank, agree to demilitarization of the West Bank and American supervision. And we have models, Jordan, Egypt, others. We can try, at least try. Before killing one another, let's try to work together. And I believe still that the design of two-state solution is still valid, despite the complications, which is the settlements. There are 3 blocks of settlements that, according to understanding between Israel and Palestinians, they are going to be next to Israel in return for land given to Palestinians. And then there are about 80,000 settlers, mostly very, very radical on the West Bank. They can remain. We cannot evacuate them because it will create civil war in Israel. We cannot evacuate them. They can stay there unarmed, residents or citizens of Palestinians, as they are Arabs in Israel. There will be Jews in the Palestinian state. And Jerusalem should not be divided. It should be shared. I know it sounds naive, but the alternative is worse. What is alternative? The alternative, if we keep holding the territories that were 54 years, is going to be an apartheid state. And the world is going to hate us more. And all our explanations of the Shoah and what have you wouldn't help. The world is fed up. You see it in America, among Jewish kids. Not only among the Gentiles, Jewish kids are disillusioned with Israel, not in vain. So we have to be courageous. Unfortunately, as Ronni pointed out, our leaders are not courageous enough. They were courageous leaders, but one was assassinated because he sold peace, this rabbi. Incidentally, it happens also to Sadat. So it's very dangerous in the Middle East to be leaders for peace, but there is no other alternative. The alternative is bloodshed and bloodshed and bloodshed, which can spread all over the world, a Muslim-Jewish Armageddon. We have to, this is in the worst case scenario. We have to avoid it, and the crux is the Palestinian issue. The crux is the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, and there is a way to settle it. As Olmert was Prime Minister of Israel. He suggested something. Mahmoud Abbas didn't accept it for a while, then he regretted it. There are blueprints. Clinton 2000, the Arab Peace Initiative 2002, Geneva, there are so many. But we have to do it. And again, we need leadership. And if we don't have leadership, as I said earlier, and I repeated, we need the help of Mr. Biden, President Biden, who, in my opinion, thinks in the right direction. Thanks.
So maybe Dr. Cohen, with the related question. So there was a perception merely months ago when the Abrahamic Accords were signed with the Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco, Sudan, that there was an outside-in approach because there was a common enemy between the Sunni states and Israel, which was Iran. The other Arab states, the signatories, including plus Egypt, plus Jordan, have had to maintain a certain quiet in the face of what's going on now. Do you think that approach of isolating Iran and Iran's proxies has been materially weakened by the events of the past weeks, or is that still the way that this could play out?
Well, on the one hand, Dubai still welcomes Israelis. So the Abraham Accords are still there, and it's quite encouraging, actually. But on the other hand, watching the media and watching youngsters going to the streets in Israel, I'm talking about the Arab Israelis, of course, is a reason to be more concerned. That's what we have to deal with now. I think our first priority has to deal with the Arab Israelis now in the mixed cities, such as Jaffa, such as Acre. This is the real problem of Israelis now. The inside connection, the inside ties between different societies within the Israeli society. The Abraham Accords are there. Dubai still welcomes Israelis. We have, first of all, and our first priority has to do with inside problems within Israeli society. I do believe this is our first mission to do before everything else. The Palestinian issue is important, but also the Palestinians are divided. They are divided geographically. They are divided by regimes. It's a total different regime. The Hamas regime in the Gaza Strip is, of course, very religious and very suppressive. And the Fatah regime in the West Bank is a total different thing. It's a democratic regime. So unless they have reconciliation within the Palestinians, it will be very difficult to deal with the whole problem of the Palestinian issue now. So I think our first priority has to do within Arab Israelis and mixed cities within Israel, such as Jaffa, Acre, and even in Jerusalem. Just today, we've heard 2 youngsters were stabbed near the police headquarters, near the Har HaTzofim Mount Scopus campus, just today. And so everything, we have to focus, first of all, in the things within Israel's society. That's my belief.
So, Dr. Shaked, could you comment, please, on the many items here, and the one that I think has been, in this particular event, most troubling to all of us around the world, which is the internal conflict that we've seen to a degree we've not seen previously between Arabs, Muslims, and Jews inside the state of Israel in response to the conflicts on the Temple Mount and Al-Aqsa.
Let me first say one important thing. Every religious movement is also a political movement. That's we have to remember. And in order to fight against the religious movement, we need also political steps. Now let's go back to our biggest problem, and my big concern is the Israeli citizen, the Arab Israeli citizen, or the Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel. They are with us, 21% of the population. We gave them all the rights, and according to the declaration of our state in 1948, we gave them all rights to be here as a full citizenship. But for so many years, we did nothing in order to adopt them, to make them more Israelis. Yes, they are in their identity Palestinians, but they choose from their own will to live in the state of Israel as full citizenship. During the last years, something happened. More and more Palestinians are involved in the Israeli civil society, and we became one. But as I said, they are Palestinians. And when there are problems in Gaza, or when there are problems in East Jerusalem, in Al-Aqsa, there is emotion and collective emotion, feelings of the Palestinians, even in Israel, because they are part of the Palestinians collective. And if we are not going to solve problem with the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and we are not going to solve the problems of Al-Aqsa, we are going to have problems inside Israel. And the problems inside Israel, it's much, much worse. The president of our state, Reuven Rivlin, he said it's a civil war. And he was standing on television, in front of the television screen, and he said, and he was crying and said, please stop the civil war inside Israel. It was terrible for days. But I think that it's not all the Arabs of Israel. It's just a minority, a very small minority inside the Arab society and also inside the Israeli society. And we have together, all rabbis, teachers, the textbook, whatever you want, we have to fight against racism. We have to fight and to make people understand, the children, our children, to make them understand that we are living in a democratic state. And the Arabs who are here in Israel, we gave them the citizenship. We decided that they're going to be our citizen in this country. So let's behave to them exactly as we behave to our neighbors here in Jerusalem or in another place. That's the most important thing. And people don't understand it. I'm so sorry that there is a wall, unseen wall of hatred between Jews and Arabs just because of Al-Aqsa, because we are not giving them full rights, because of the racism in Israel, and because of small groups that the Israeli government, that the Israeli police, the Israeli judicial system is not doing enough to stop it. I think that this is a mission of the country, because with Gaza, we are going to have, we can solve the problem. With the West Bank, someday we'll have some kind of solution, but the Arabs will live with us. We are going to live together. And if we want to live in peace and a beautiful life as we have in Israel, and don't be mistaken, we have in Israel beautiful life. The economy is good, people are nice, the cities are beautiful and nice, and people are very nice here. But as I said, the small groups, we have to fight against them and to take the racism out of our life here in Israel. And it's happened because what happened in the West Bank and in Gaza. That's a problem. The minute that we are going to solve the problem there, also the Arabs in Israel will be much more calm, and they are going to be more satisfied and will enter more to the civic society of Israel.
Well, with that, thank you very, very much, Dr. Shaked, Dr. Cohen, Dr. Maoz. We are unfortunately at the end of our hour together. I must admit there are maybe 2 or 3 dozen more questions. I tried to synthesize many of them, but there are others very specific. And I would say what comes through in many of them are different perspectives on a route to peace. But what is common in everyone, which I think was common in each of your remarks, even with the differences of perspective and opinion, is consistent with the goals of the Truman Institute, which is the advancement of peace. If this were easy, it all would have been done a long time ago. It's not easy, but I think to avoid civil war, to avoid people killing each other, this is our common goal. And I think the role of the university and the role that each of you plays and the role of the Truman Institute to get us there is something that we can all be terribly, terribly proud of. So, shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
משה, אתה בסדר?
I think everyone